Alright, so I'm going to go through these problems on solving uh, trig equations that are in factored or we need to put into factored form. So here we've got a product of two trig functions equal to 0, and the way we're going to solve it is using the zero product property that says if you've got a product equal to 0, either the first part of the equation, part of the product equals 0, or the second part of the equation equals 0, second part of the product. And so now it comes down to knowing a little bit of the unit circle. So to say sine of x equals 0 means that the y value on the unit circle is 0. That happens at these 2 points, at 1 comma 0 and negative 1 comma 0. What we're looking for are the angles. So this is an angle of 0 and an angle of pi. For cosine of x equal to 0, it's going to happen at the 2 points that are on the y-axis. This happens at pi over 2 and 3 pi over 2. And the directions for all these problems from 1 to 20 say the answers between 0 and 2 pi. So we have our 4 answers. The answers are going to be 0, pi over 2, pi, and 3 pi over 2. Right, and that's number 1. All right, so let's go on to number 2. So here we've got the equation tan x times cosecant x minus 2 equals 0. Once again, we can use the zero product property. So we've got that tangent x equals 0, or cosecant x minus 2 equals 0. The second equation we still need to solve for the trig function, so we'll need to write cosecant x equals positive 2 by adding 2 to the other side. And this freaks everybody out, but remember that cosecant is the reciprocal of sine, so we can write this as sine of x equal the reciprocal of 2, which is 1/2. Alright, so now we need to know where on the unit circle does tangent x equals 0. If you have trouble remembering that, remember that tan x is usually the y over the x in the unit circle. So the only way that you can get y over x to equal 0 is if the y is equal to 0. So the two places where y equals 0 is when the angle is 0 and when the angle is pi. For sine x equal to 1/2, once again we're looking for a triangle where the y side, the opposite side, is going to be a half, which hopefully you know means that it is a y triangle, that the y is going to be shorter than the x side. And we need sine to be positive, so we have both the first and the second quadrant triangles. It'll be helpful for you to know that this is a 30-degree angle, and that's pi over 6. And this angle over here will be 5 pi over 6. If you're having trouble coming up with this angle, remember that going from this angle all the way to here would be a full pi, which if you break into sixes would be 6 pi over 6. And you just have to go back 1 pi over 6 to get to this angle. So once again, we've got 4 answers because we want our answers between 0 and 2 pi. Our 4 answers are 0, pi over 6, 5 pi over 6, and pi. All right. Next, we're going to go on to number 3. All right, so we've got another equation here, but this one's not factored. It's equal to 0, but it's not in factored form. You should notice there are three terms here, so it's a trinomial. So to factor a trinomial, what we usually do is we try to break it up into 2 binomials. Now there are other techniques for thinking about this, but I'll just tell you the way that I do it, and if you have another way, that's totally fine. So what I think about is that the first 2 things we put in these binomials, the first terms, have to multiply to our first term up here in our trinomial. And so I know that the only real options we have here is 2 cosine x and cosine x. Those are the only 2 things that really are going to multiply to 2 cosine squared x and be useful. Now the last 2 numbers have to multiply to -1. We got a couple options here. It could either go +1 -1 or -1 +1. And if you're not sure which, you could just try both and see which one works out. and I'll show you how you can test if your answer is right or not. So let's guess that it is +1 minus 1. To know if we're right, we're just going to distribute. So 2 cosine x times cosine x gives me the 2 cosine squared x. The 2 cosine x times the -1 gives me the -2 cosine x. 1 times cosine x would give me a +1 cosine x. And then the +1 times the -1, that would give me a -1. And if I combine like terms, I get 2 cosine squared x minus 1 cosine x minus 1 equals 0. What you should notice is that our middle term has the wrong sign. So our only possibility to get it so it's the right sign is if we flip this equation around and write it as 2 cosine of x minus 1 times cosine x plus 1 equals 0. And if you were to distribute this out, you would find that it does give us the right original equation. So now we're ready to ZPP this. So we've got either 2 cosine of x minus 1 equals 0, or cosine of x plus 1 equals 0. If we solve the first equation, we'll have cosine 2 cosine x equals 1, or cosine x equals a half. In the second equation, we're going to have cosine of x equals -1. All right, to solve the first equation, we need to know on the unit circle where cosine is equal to a half. It'll be helpful to know that that means that we're going to have a tall triangle like this, and that happens at pi/3, or a 60-degree angle. And the other place where cosine is positive is down here in the fourth quadrant at 5pi/3. Okay, so that's for the first equation. The second equation, there's only one spot on the unit circle where cosine x, the x value is -1. That happens to be right here at pi radians. So those are our three answers. We're going to have pi/3, pi, and 5pi/3. Our only answers between 0 and 2 pi. Alright, so we've got one more that I'm going to do in this video. So this is problem number 4. Oops, try that again. Did that in the wrong order. Got it. So we're going to solve 2 cosine x minus 1 equals 0. This is one of those problems where you just need to step back for a minute and pay attention to what you have. This is not a factoring problem. This is just a straightforward solve the algebra problem. We need to add 1 to the other side, so we got 2 cosine x equals 1. Divide by 2, we got cosine x equals a half. Well, that looks familiar. That was actually our last problem. So without doing a lot of work, we should know that we're going to have an angle up here at pi/3. That will give us a cosine equal to a half. And the same thing happens down here at 5pi/3. So this problem only has two answers between 0 and 2 pi. The two answers are pi/3 and 5pi/3. All right, and that'll be the conclusion of the very first video.